want to welcome everyone to the call. This is our BANA Continental call, which happens the third Wednesday of every month at 1 p.m. Central Time. And we are the Balneology Association of North America. We're a 501c3 association with initiatives for research, information, and education for balneology, arts, sciences, and cultures. This is supported by members' donations, either lifetime, business, corporate, or individuals. And we appreciate your interest and support for the study and care of mineral waters. Today we have Jeff Birkby, who lives in Missoula, Montana, where he consults on geothermal energy projects and assists hot spring resort owners on design and marketing. Jeff's passion for Montana's thermal waters began in the 80s when he first started working as a geothermal energy specialist for the state of Montana's Energy Office. He's an experienced speaker and the author of several books about hot springs, including Touring Montana and Wyoming Hot Springs, Touring Oregon and Washington Hot Springs, and Images of America, Montana Hot Springs. Let me get somebody in here. Just a minute. Okay. He's also the author of Geothermal Energy in Montana, a Consumer's Guide. We invited Jeff today as a guest speaker to share his expansive knowledge about the historical use of balneology for mineral waters rejuvenation from the 1800s to today. Jeff currently lectures around the state of Montana as well as nationally on a variety of hot springs topics. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, and any people coming in, I'll just add them in. But Jeff, you can go ahead and start with your presentation. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Janet. And again, I'm honored to be speaking today and have a lot of respect for the Balneology organization and the work you guys have been doing. And what I thought I'd do today, talking to Janet, is focus especially on some of the stories of the frontier West as they relate to balneology, to cures, to health-giving statements, to stories, to legends, and talk for perhaps half an hour and then open it up to hopefully share your experiences and thoughts and things you've seen that might be relevant or things that might come to light when I start talking here. But what I have today are quite a few newspaper articles and marketing brochures and clips from things in the 1800s, especially the 1880s, the early 1900s, of how hot springs were marketed as health-giving processes, as cures, as ability to entice people to come to different hot springs resorts. So I'll start with that. This is just an image I found online of how you see at the very bottom, hot springs remedy, the only guaranteed pile cure. Piles were hemorrhoids, but it often was the hot springs and the remedies they prescribed in the 1800s had very little controls or government controls, or there was no FDA in the US. There was no one to prove claims or to test them. So there were amazing claims made by hot springs, and based on oral traditions and legends and kernels of truth, and sometimes quite a bit of truth. And what I want to do today is just show what some of the statements were and get your reactions to those too. A lot of the early advertising in hot springs in America came from the East Coast, especially from Hot Springs, Arkansas, other hot springs on the East Coast. This was one from Hot Springs, Arkansas, for a liniment that was made out of hot springs. And it talks about a certain cure for rheumatism, neuralgia, earache, toothache, burns and scalds, sores and inflamed eyes, good for man or beast. I like that statement. So there were, and what's interesting is the phrase "a certain cure," that a lot of times in the 1800s, we saw definitive black and white. There was no question in some of these ads that whatever ails you would be cured with certainty by bathing in these hot springs or drinking the water. Here's one from British Columbia, Halcyon Springs. It says here, its baths cure all nervous and muscular disease. Cure all nervous and muscular disease. Its waters heal all kidney and stomach ailments. The baths and waters eliminate all metal poisons from the system. So these early ads were definitive. It was, you bathe here, we'll cure your disease, we'll eliminate all the poisons, case closed. I want to step back a minute to talk about some of the early legends and stories about Native American cures and how the Europeans, as we came in, romanticized the Native American uses of hot water in the West. This is from a poster from a hot springs in Western Montana called Sleeping Child, where a legend has it that Native Americans were being pursued in battle, and they left their children on the banks of this hot springs, where the children fell asleep, and the hot springs protected them in a way as the natives went off to war. This was one from Hot Springs, Arkansas, where it again talked about how the Native Americans would use hot water for treating rheumatism. And again, they would talk about how medicine men would try in vain with other cures to get cures for rheumatism or other diseases, but oftentimes only the hot springs themselves were successful in curing these things. Montana had a hot spring called Hunter's Hot Springs east of Bozeman. This is a brochure cover, a romanticized vision of a Native American drinking the hot water out of the hot springs there. A man named Dr. A.J. Hunter was the first man to claim this, the first European to claim this hot springs. Many of the hot springs in the West were first claimed right after the Civil War, when people started to divert their attention from the war to moving west. So 1865, 1870, 1875, in that period, we see a huge movement to people who would homestead hot springs or establish very rustic resorts. And Hunter's was one of these. Dr. Hunter was from Arkansas and was familiar with Hot Springs, Arkansas when he moved to Montana. And he homesteaded on this resort. He talks about during the early years when Indians were visitors, Dr. Hunter witnessed at least 1,000 teepees around these springs containing Indians who had come to be cured of diseases, which had baffled the skills of great medicine men of many tribes. So again, the brochures, the marketing emphasized 1,000 teepees, Indians bathing their elderly and infirm, and being cured of diseases that had baffled the medicine people there, medicine men. Another one, this is the North Platte River near Saratoga, Wyoming. Saratoga Hot Springs has some good legends about and stories about Native Americans. It was important in the smallpox epidemic. There's a report I found that the Sioux and Cheyenne tribes used the hot springs in an attempt to treat smallpox infections in 1874. That they put tribal members in a swing attached to the end of a pole and lower them into the hot springs for several minutes, then lift them out, plunge them into cold water back and forth. But the article said that these treatments failed to cure the smallpox, and that there were hundreds of burial sites on the banks of the river near the hot springs in Saratoga. Some of the first cures and stories about Europeans using hot water, again, came after the 1860s. This is a hot springs near the town of Hot Springs, Montana, in western Montana. This is an example of a mud bath on the property, and some of the early settlers, probably ranchers, taking a bath there in the mud baths at Hot Springs, Montana. A little later, they cribbed in the pool a bit more, and you can see both Europeans here, but also Native Americans. Probably these are locals that were dressed up for some occasion that shared the resort or shared the hot water at the town of Hot Springs. Again, they had both mud baths and water baths there. This is a picture of the old mud bath at Hot Springs when it was enclosed. And it started to develop its marketing around the theme of limp in, hop out, or limp in, leap out. Oftentimes you saw that phrase too, when with caricatures of people infirm, often with rheumatism. Rheumatism is a common theme throughout the treatments of a lot of hot springs in the West, was as a almost guaranteed cure, according to some brochures. There were also people that would bathe their corns in the mud bath and bunions in their feet and sit on these benches and be able to stick their feet in the water and socialize while they're doing that as well. Another interesting, this is a postcard I found. It says, "You don't need no damn gun. I've been bathing at Camas Hot Springs." So you can apparently just chase a bear with, or get away from a bear because you're so vibrant with your health from being in a hot springs there. Also in the town of Hot Springs is a hotel called the Symes Hotel from the 1900s. They had a marketing brochure, again, where they promoted their cures. If you look at the bottom of the brochure here, you'll see it says a cure or relief of arthritis, high blood pressure, skin diseases, stomach ulcers, kidney ailments, rheumatism, asthma, and many other ailments. You see too, a lot of hot springs say that the water at that hot springs is the only water of its kind in the US. I mean, that's a nice vague statement. It doesn't say the only water of what kind, so you can put in what you want. But oftentimes hot springs in the West they would market theirs as being identical to the water in Baden-Baden, Germany, or identical to Karlovy Vary in Czech Republic, or the chemicals were very similar to some other hot springs. Or they would say it's the hottest known hot springs, or the deepest hot springs, or some other claim to fame that they could then use in their marketing. Here's a quote from one of the brochures at that hotel. "Maybe it's a sign of old age, but if it is, all the more reason I should grow old as young as possible," which is an interesting turn of a phrase there. One of my favorite stories in hot springs in Montana is an old abandoned hot springs down near Virginia City, Montana, in the southwest corner of the state, called Puller's Springs. And this is a picture of Puller Springs I took about 30, 40 years ago. It actually had closed by the 1870s. It was really important in the gold mining era in the late 1860s, next to Virginia City, about 10 miles from Virginia City. And I've seen stories of doctors in Virginia City would prescribe that a patient was to be taken to this hot springs for treatment, and often for rheumatism and other debilities like that. And the prescription sometimes would say that the patient was to be forcibly held in the hot water, because this water was about 106, 108 degrees. So it's not comfortable. It was a little too hot. But the prescription said the patient was to be held forcibly in the water for a few minutes for his treatment. And one article said a patient had been held kicking and screaming for several minutes, but after a few treatments, he was fishing with grasshopper bait on the Ruby River, completely cured of his rheumatism. Here's another quote from that hot springs we just saw. "Bob Peters, who was paralyzed and in a helpless condition for many months, has been restored to health by bathing in the water of the Puller's hot springs. This was a very bad case of paralysis, and the cure is like raising one from the dead." So the writing was very florid, very, very prolific. I think the vocabulary of the reporters in that day was, they had a lot of tools to pull from in their writing, and they did not hesitate to use that in their writing. Alhambra was a hot spring south of Helena, Montana. Their claim to fame was the proprietor, who really was a brilliant marketer of marketing the water as a source of a curative agent, especially when drinking the water. And he actually shipped the water by tank car to various points in the West and promoted the drinking of the water for health purposes. Gregson Hot Springs, now called Fairmont Hot Springs, is near Anaconda and Butte, Montana. They had a particular focus on rheumatism. It says in their ad here. Had several different hotels that were burned in fires, but they were beautiful buildings in the 1900s. Here's one of their 1912 statements about the virtues of the water cannot be disputed in face of the large number of cures they have effected. Some of the most desperate cases of rheumatism, neuralgia, catarrh, kidney diseases, cutaneous affections, and kindred diseases have been speedily and permanently cured by the use of these waters. For those suffering from nervous prostration or general debility, the springs are a certain benefit, and if sufficient length of time is given to their use, will affect a certain cure. Again, very, very positive, very proactive. No question in their mind that this water would affect a cure. Another nice old resort in Montana is Boulder Hot Springs. This is the original building of Boulder Hot Springs in the early 1900s, called the Hotel May. This is their indoor plunge, which is a nice plunge, has a trapeze and a slippery slide. But the reporter he rhapsodized about the beauty of this water in this phrase here. The plunge at Boulder Hot Springs is filled with the health-giving fluid of the most ravishing temperature, into which the pleasure seekers, regardless of sex, plunge and swim and float around in a heterogeneous mass in perfect ecstasy. Just who wouldn't want to go to Boulder Hot Springs after reading that? And this is 1886, and this is written. Down the road from Boulder, just over the ridge, is a place called Warm Springs, which was a large mound of carbon deposits with the hot springs on the top. And it was originally built as a resort for many years. In the 1870s, it was a resort, and then it became the state territory home for the mentally insane, or the asylum. And the proprietors were paid $1 per day per patient to house them and treat them at the hot springs. Here's the quote from their brochure, or from a reporter. It would require volumes to enumerate all the cures effected by the use of the waters of these springs. Suffice it to say that in every instance where these springs have been given a fair trial, the patient has been restored to health. The unusually large percentage of insane people who have regained their reason at the asylum speaks volumes of praise of this great sanitarium. It's not totally clear to me, but there's an implication, I think, there that the hot springs themselves were used in the mental treatments and had some impact on the regaining reason of some of the patients, which is quite a statement. Here's another picture of that mound in the old days with the hot springs at the top that would flow down to the sides of the mound and made this large, very visible carbonate mound in the valley. Near Helena, Montana was a resort in the 1860s called Wasweiler's Hot Springs. Later became the beautiful Broadwater Resort in the 1880s. But this was the first resort in the 1860s, built by Mr. Wasweiler. He had a false front over the baths. This was in the hot spring little hotel there in the valley. What he said in his brochure was, these springs are a cure-all for all the present age. It matters not what your disease is. After washing in these life-giving waters, you are bound to come out with a clean skin. The proprietor of Wasweiler stated that he could satisfy the most incredulous that a great number of cases of inflammatory rheumatism have been cured by the use of the hot springs. So he said the facts speak for themselves. Look at all the people that have been cured they're the proof. They're my marketing are the satisfied patients and clients. There's another picture up close of the baths. You can see that the false frontier being supported there. The bath was behind there, and the saloon. I always like this penny farthing, the old Victorian bicycle there too, with the huge front wheel from the Victorian age. About 2 hours east of Helena is White Sulphur Springs, which was a running bathhouse in the 1860s, early 1870s. Here's the brick bathhouse. The springs themselves, I think, were located here. And then over here, you can see an open air pool with some bathing facilities or diving facilities there. Here's a close-up of the springs themselves and the bathhouse behind it. 1878, a reporter said that many a decrepit gold miner has passed over these springs, tired, sore, and stiffened, aching with rheumatic pains, born from the effects of laboring in the wet mines. After a season of bathing, they returned again to his labor, feeling as nimble and fresh as if 10 years younger. So oftentimes, again, the only hot bath a lot of ranchers and cowboys and miners had was a hot springs on a Friday night to go and have a soak there. Here's a mineral bottle label from a bottle of the bottled water. They both had uncarbonated and carbonated versions. Recommended for stomach, liver, kidney, bladder diseases, but also excellent for lemonades. Gregson Hot Springs, I think I may have mentioned that earlier, but there's another picture here of it. I think I already read this. I think this is a duplicate, didn't I talk about that? Okay, I'll skip that. Sorry about that. And near Gregson was another hot springs just over the divide towards Bozeman called Pipestone Hot Springs. And their claim to fame is that they make ancient kidneys new, which is an interesting phrase. Invalids suffering from rheumatism, neuralgia, dyspepsia, paralysis, liver complaints, impure blood, lead poisoning, etc., experience speedy and permanent relief after a course of bathing and drinking. There's Hot Springs is another well-known hot springs in the 1900s, early 1920s, on the way to Yellowstone Park. It's near Bozeman. They had a wonderful solarium where people would sit after bathing on the south side of the natatorium or their plunge area. But they also had a unique walking path that would take the clients and patients past these about a dozen different springs that came up from the ground on this winding path. And over each spring would be this drinking kiosk, which had a pedestal in the center upon which were hung these ladles. And people would stop, grab the ladle, dip it in the boiling water or the hot water, and sip it, and then move on down the path to the next hot springs. It's similar to me if you've been in some hot springs trails in Europe, in Central Europe. Sometimes they have these different walking areas where you can sample different waters, and they claim different curative properties for different springs you go to. You go to one for kidney disease and one for liver and so on within the areas. Hunters also bottled their water. They had mineral water that they bottled and shipped around the area as well. Corwin Springs is the one just north of Yellowstone Park. It was this Alpine style building about 1908 it was built. This is the natatorium, the plunge building. Here's an ad for going to Corwin on your way to Yellowstone, but it had complete medical and surgical departments, cures rheumatism and all curable diseases, which I like that phrase. We cure curable diseases. So it's hard to argue with that, you know. Moving over, this is one from Oregon called Belknap Hot Springs, east of Eugene, Oregon. The medicinal properties of the water have been proven by the cure of those who have visited them, who have been afflicted with various disease, particular female disease, weakness, scrofula, rheumatism, inflammations, external, internal, and general debility, 1874. Also in Oregon is a place called Hot Lake near La Grande, Oregon. Hot Lake Lodge is there, an old sanitarium from the 1860s. Very, very hot water. And I found a legend about this, an old story about a cowboy, which is really interesting. The Oregon News, this is in 1914, talked about a ranch hand who had been severely injured by a horse that bucked him off, kicked him, and bit him. He had 3 cracked ribs, a broken arm, sundry serious internal injuries. He dragged himself, apparently this happened near the hot springs. He dragged himself to the hot springs where he flopped in the steaming water and floundered around like a fish or lobster. Some reports say that he was cured of every ailment, including his swearing habit. So that's the first time I'd seen swearing as a curative disease there. The same hot lake, it said the water was pleasing to the taste. It has cured and resorted to heal innumerable invalids who have tried in vain much advertised cures at noted resorts. The treatments consist of copious drinking of water, hot water baths, hot vapor baths, and hot mud baths. A poultice from the sediment at the bottom of the lake relieves agonizing forms of rheumatism and reduces the swelling. Long-standing cases of dyspepsia have been cured by use of this water. Back in Wyoming, I've got a couple more here to look at. This is in Thermopolis, the Bighorn Springs, Thermopolis State Park, which is a wonderful place to visit too. A lot of Indian legends here. Also, the stories sometimes were pretty interesting. A 79-year-old man arrived at Thermopolis with snow white hair and no teeth. After he bathed for 3 months, drinking water from the Bighorn Spring, his hair was turning black and he was even sporting 17 new teeth. So I think I should try that for my own hair. We'll see. I've had several from Thermopolis. It was a pretty interesting place for some of these marketing and legends. Bill Pickering stated that the hot water not only made him feel 20 years younger, but also had convinced him to quit telling lies and stealing. So that's kind of like the other guy who was cured of his cursing, I guess. Another Thermopolis one. There are hundreds of cases of skin, blood, kidney, nervous, and kindred diseases that come to Thermopolis every month for treatment. And then in all caps, it said, no failure has ever been known. And this was a 1925 brochure. There again, that's a picture of Thermopolis State Park. And there's a variety of different soaking opportunities down there. These waters restore vitality to elderly folk and actually prolong life that has flickered, faded, and dim. A little more recent, in the 1940s, a place called Camp Aqua in Montana was taken over or proposed as a site for Montana Crippled Children Hospital to treat polio, infantile paralysis in the 1940s and 1950s. And this is an old stamp I found, a postage stamp, which promoted the place saying, help me walk, the Warm Water Project for Crippled Children. So it was promoted as a way to alleviate pain and some of the suffering from polio. And a final one that I found, this is a soap lake in Montana, in Washington State, Central Washington, a mineral-rich lake where people would put the mineral mud on them and bake in the water, and had a lot of stories about cures. This story was probably one of the most out there stories I've seen. The cowboys were camped near Soap Lake in central Washington. One of the cowboys suddenly died. His mates buried him near the shoreline and rode on down the range with their cattle. 2 weeks later, the boys were surprised to see the comrade ride into camp, the dead comrade ride into camp. He said he had been dead all right, but the water of the lake had seeped through the shore and had reached his body and brought him back to life. That's a 1908 story. So I think what the common theme I've kind of found is that the earlier the stories were, the more certain they were about the curative properties of the water and that a cure would be effective. And as time has gone on, the marketing has gone more into being supportive of health, but not as definitive on, no matter what your disease is, our hot springs will cure that. But I just love the quality of the writing, and the superlativeness of it was interesting throughout here. So we've got about 20 minutes left. I thought we would maybe open it up, Janet, to overall comments and questions. And what have you seen about cures in your writing, and how do they impact marketing at resorts now, and how has it evolved differently in other places you've been? So I'll turn it back to you, Janet.
Okay, we could stop sharing the screen and open it up to just the whole gallery if you'd like.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Can you stop sharing?
Oh, let's see. There we go.
There you go. All right.
So why do you think the hot springs in this country waned throughout our history, whereas like in Europe, Asia, they continue to this day to be a part of their culture and even a part of their medical systems? Mm-hmm. Why did we go this other direction?
Well, I can give my thoughts, and then others can chime in. But what I've read in part is because we were so late to the game compared to Europe, which had hundreds of years of using hot water as part of its medical system, and that we were not really, didn't get rolling until after the Civil War in a lot of places, the 1860s or so on. And by that time, we started to get sulfa drugs and other medical drugs coming in. And the holistic nature of using hot springs for health was not as ingrained as it had been in Europe. And I think that's what I've read, is it just had other options coming in at the same time and didn't get the traction that countries have had for centuries in other places. But that's just my thoughts. But
that's partially definitely accurate. But the other component there is that in the 1920s, there was a report that was produced through, it's called the Flexner Report, and it was a congressional report that was actually paid for by what is now became the American Medical Association. And they actually, the report, basically, this guy Abram Flexner went around and using the Johns Hopkins Medical School as the gold standard, said any kind of medical program or practice that doesn't adhere to this will not legally be considered medicine. And so it was kind of devastating to any type of medical institution, hot spring, sanitarium, even kind of early there were other types of physicians up until about the 1920s and 30s when medical programs, homeopathic hospitals, eclectic medical hospitals, all these other kind of adjacent medical disciplines that were forced out of existence through this kind of report and this kind of congressional act. So yes, it is a little bit that we were kind of later to the game to establishing this. It is a little bit of kind of industrial modernism with drugs. And of course, by the time penicillin came on the market, kind of the idea that you would go and take 3 weeks to heal from something rather than, from the time penicillin was invented, it took a few decades before it became in common use. But by that time, it was kind of like by the 1950s, it was like, that's the way we're going to go, except for like we see with the mental patients, mental health patients. that became kind of the last holdover a lot of these sanitariums, because pharmacy treatment of mental health is actually a relatively recent intervention. And so I was thinking the warm springs, interesting, because a lot of the treatments that get used in the sanitariums for mental health is about neutralizing the nervous system and creating kind of a kind of a zened out experience through the use of hydrotherapy. So there's a few things during your presentation, Jeff, a fantastic presentation that just, I think that what's so interesting is that certainty from the mid 1800s. I think that now that we have kind of an objection or objective scientific rationale for understanding what's happening with these hot springs, we're moving back into that certainty. I was able to kind of look and say, well, okay, well, with rheumatism, which is basically arthritis, we now know the mechanism by which bathing in thermal springs is going to help that. Neuralgia, chronic pain, we now have kind of mechanistic understanding of why these things work. So I think we're going to see it come back full circle, but with language that unfortunately won't be as beautiful, because I really do like the way it's written as well, but probably a little bit more scientifically accurate. So kind of exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, Jeff. Absolutely. It's really got, like, and what Marcus has said there, I think it's going to be coming back around again. What struck me was, in terms of the language, two terms: if sufficient time is given, and then we need to have a conversation on cure. We need to change that word. As I say, the only thing that really is cured is bacon. But if what we need, what we need to look at, what is the cure, or a KU, a course, a series, a sequence. There is the time that water takes. It's not just one bath, but it's a series. It's a course. It's the walking and sipping and that whole thing. But no, this is, the way the superlative writing, I think, it was beautiful. It's poetry to what you're saying here, and the images. And I think it's how to, we came, in terms of colonists, we came late too, but these water holes have been used long even before the Romans, so to speak, or even the Greeks. If you look at some of these sites, it is kind of ironic now that we will be meeting in Hot Springs, Arkansas, where the Army and Navy proved the benefit of penicillin for VD patients, back prior to World War. Anyway, but so there's this huge cycle, or this huge rhythm of time that I think is going on. And again, what Marcus is saying, and I think what BANA is trying is to look at what's the science, but then also what's the art and the culture here. And so what you presented here is just, imagely, the images are just rich. And we need to do a tour of Montana. We did some last year, but Vicki, we'll put some more tours together. Let's tour tours or cour tours.
Come on up.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's wonderful.
I wanted to bring up that there are two locations that do have drinking water, different drinking waters that you can make your own tour with. And one is in Manitou Springs, and they have about 8 or 9 different types of water that come up out of artistically designed fountains in the town. And they were known for, all different levels of history of people going there to take care of their health and wellness needs, especially TB. There were little huts still positioned around their, I think, candy shops right now, but they were TB huts, and people were served the waters that were prescribed for them in the different blends from the different springs. And the blend of those waters are what helped balance that out. The other place is in Saratoga Springs, New York State, and they also have a tour you can take of different waters that come up out of that fault line and taste different waters, like deep, heavy iron water to the light, sparkling Saratoga waters. So those are just 2 spots in the U.S. that I know of. There's others like Palomar and Carlsbad down in California that also you can go and drink the waters there. So those are kind of fun places to go to have that experience here in the U.S.
Yeah, and Janet, to add to that, actually in Hot Springs, Arkansas, they have fountains throughout the
Right.
historic area, and people, when I was there in September, pulled up with their cars and they filled up jugs and jugs and jugs of water to take home or use with their greenhouse. So they're throughout Hot Springs, Arkansas as well. They're really neat.
Ashland, Oregon
Talking from
has drinking springs.
Yeah.
from a marketing standpoint, if there's a lawyer in the house anywhere, because I think what they say, and we have some old historical ads like that from our property as well that are just so fun, to really give people what the benefits of the soaking and the benefits of the minerals are. But that's always in the back of my head, is who's going to come back and say, like you said, the cure word, this. It allows you to have more time to be relaxed. And also because of what we do, it's like, wait a minute, I just bought a stay at your hotel and I'm staying there for 3 nights and you said I'd be relaxed because you have a lot of lithium and I'm not. Well, then I'm, relax a little bit. So that's where I think the history, they didn't have the litigation that we would have, where it would really go to that point where you can't say that about something when it came in. And that's unfortunate, unless we got better along with the science on it.
And that's one of the things that our organization is really trying to hold right now. Tina, where are you calling from, Tina?
Arizona.
Okay, so one of the things that we're looking at is getting mineral water reports from different spring sites around the country so that we can actually help generate these kind of traditional use reports that BANA kind of puts together, and your site can point to our organization and saying, yeah, these are what the traditional uses of these waters are. And we go further and we can talk about kind of scientific analysis of the literature and whatnot for that. So that's part of what membership to our organization supports, those types of initiatives, so that we can build that kind of network across North America, so that we're all saying the same thing and all coming from a responsible point of view, and not putting ourselves out there making any claims that can't be founded or that are irresponsible in that way.
Right.
So
or I can point and say they said it, not me.
Right, and our organization is, we exist for that purpose exactly, as being able to house that type of information and show, not only here's the modern science, but here's the history that exists here. Here's the culture of this, and that's the claim that we're making. I think if you go out there and start saying, well, come and ignore what your doctor says and come to my spring instead, then okay, you're on your own there. That's no longer in the BANA best practices zone. But a good point. But I want to make one other real quick point just on the drinking cure thing, because Jeff, when you brought it up, I'm just such a nerd about this stuff. So it's so fascinating. If you imagine these towns that have these multiple springs, right? Mm-hmm. As a patient, your first experience would be to meet with a doctor, get a physical exam, go through your history, and the doctor would then prescribe you usually it's a little index card with what number spring to visit at what time of the day. So depending on your ailment, you might start with a spring that helps stimulate digestion first thing in the morning, and then you'd have your morning breakfast. And then you go back to a spring that helps clear the kidneys of the uric acid wastes from that breakfast. And, and then maybe you do some iron springs in the afternoon to help build up the body. I mean, there's actually like a true art to prescribing these things. And it all has to do with restoring and building back function into the body. So one of the things that in your presentation, Jeff, was mentioned being cured by the drinking cures was dyspepsia, which is, acid stomach, which today we would all just be taking Tums or Prilosec or something like this. Well, the waters actually enhance circulation to the digestive tissue. So they're doing the opposite that a Tums would do. Tums shuts off the function of the acid. The waters actually stimulate more circulation, which improves the function of the digestive tissue, which has it regulate itself better. So you actually cure the disease by strengthening the body. And I think that's when we as an industry think about how we're talking about waters and talking about the effects of these waters, I think we always want to think to structure and function. How are we relaxing the tissue, and how are we improving the functionality of the systems of the body? So just, I just wanted to make those points.
Yeah, I think What he's saying is that functionality is really important. Two, the spa industry has a lot of, they're always looking at trends. What are the new trends coming? Things on that order. I think if we also look at our legacies, what are the legitimate legacies, the legends, I think that will broaden this whole sense of water culture. So, whenever you see the word trends, see what might be there, a legacy to that. Because, there's no update to water in that sense. And water is Mother Nature. And so there's so much more. Again, this is just a beautiful presentation.
Last summer, UNESCO designated 11 mineral springs spas in Europe as world culture sites. And so they all had in common that, it was built around mineral springs, but other criteria included like beautiful environments where people could walk in nature or whatever, as well as social activities, maybe even casinos. I mean, that was all taken into consideration when they designated these 11 European spas for World Heritage Sites. So I'm sitting here thinking, do we have, all of America or Western America or wherever, enough spas that would fit that criteria that could also be recommended for World Heritage Sites? And I think that would also, enhance the concept of the use of hot springs in this country.
It's a nice point, Irene. We'll have to look and see what the criteria is for it.
Yeah, it's all online, and it's very interesting. There were 3 in Germany, Bath, England, Czech Republic, France had several, Italy had 3, but you can see which 11 were chosen, and then they were designated as a series. That was the first time they had done that.
Anyone else have some favorite cures from the water?
How are you saying that? KUR?
Absolutely.
No, I think it is how to put this. I mean, there's so much, I think, here in America that we can do comparable to what they've done in Europe. And I think it's up to us to do this kind of continental cure.
I always appreciate the yoga teacher BKS Iyengar. He would always say that yoga cures what is curable and makes tolerable what is not curable. And I think that there's something to be said for what we're doing here. It's like, and again, like Jeff, cures all curable diseases, but there's something real about that. It's true. Cures it does. If you can again look at it from that function perspective. If you can improve function, you're going to cure what you're able to take care of. What is unable to be fixed will be relieved or will be more tolerable than before. So I think that there's some interest there.
Well, I like too that the movement I see now more too of talking about just mental well-being and general happiness, and you don't have to necessarily have a cure for a disease to enjoy and benefit from hot water, from hot springs.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of marketing is looking at, that in addition to the other. I think historically it was really focused so much on debilitating disease, perhaps, as more than perhaps general wellness feeling and take care of your own health, more preventative uses of the water.
So we need to do water wellness, the deep water wellness, rather than medicalize it. Yeah.
When I was visiting in France at a resort in Vallée this past summer, in 2020, they built a whole new resort, and they based it on studies that they collected around France. And they had a number of different waters also in this town. These were cold waters, and they would heat the waters for the pools, etc. But it was, as Marcus said, prescribed waters and for different conditions. And you would, they actually had a 21-day stay that the French government would pay for if you committed to 21 days of going through their program. But what I was fascinated by was that really the studies of the three areas, which were diabetes, obesity, and rheumatism, which were basically salts, fats, and sugars. And this is simplified for me. Often a lot of these conditions we speak about are imbalances in our diets of salts, fats, and sugars. And so they really based their programs on studies having to do with these three areas that were pretty common, causing different distinct conditions that could come out of those imbalances. So it was a very progressive and forward-thinking resort program, which included, health and wellness, mental health and wellness, meditation, and dietary concerns. So it was a really well-rounded new program put together there based on drinking waters and programs around just balancing out your body, which is really what the waters do. They balance out the body. And then your conditions sort of fall into place, what your needs are really.
Where was that, Janet?
Oh.
Where was that in France?
Baliban in the Ardèche region. Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Thank you all so much. It's such a pleasure to learn about you all. I've been a hot springs advocate for many years, so what a pleasure to be in this conversation. My question for you, Jeff, because I know you also have experience with geothermal. Have there been any hot springs resorts that basically drill down to access the hot water that aren't a natural hot spring that are being utilized for their same medicinal therapeutic properties? Does that play a role in all of this? I'm just curious where that delineation may lie. Thank you so much.
Yes, often there are quite a few hot springs in the West that came about because someone had drilled for oil or water and instead hit thermal resources. And by default, then that became the source for a hot springs resort. I can think of 3 of those in Montana, and there are other places too where drilling has found that. What's more common, I think, too, is a natural hot springs that the resource has been augmented by drilling to provide additional resource or to provide a backup source and help guarantee. In fact, we'll be talking at the Hot Springs Convention in Arkansas about this very topic. How do resorts protect their resource by thinking again about the geology of their land and where the water comes from, and what would they do in case the water were to stop? How would they reacquire access to that subterranean resource? So you're right. It's interesting how some resorts, their entire resource is based on an old oil well drilled in the 50s that did not hit oil but hit hot water instead, and the oil company pulled away and didn't know what to do, but someone came in and turned it into a resort.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. I hope to attend the conference.
Good.
All right, Janet, I had one question about, you mentioned that the 21-day treatment, and in my research, I've seen that number 21 as a 3 weeks term of treatment, fairly common both in the U.S. and Europe. And I'm curious why, Marcus, maybe why the number 21 came about. Why is 3 weeks such a standard in so much of the treatment?
I think that it has to do just kind of with empiric historical kind of, kind of like what was witnessed and kind of how that became standardized over time. Like Jonathan said, there's an element of time that is required, just like any exercise, right? You can go to the gym one day and you'll feel a little sore, but to get the real effect from exercise, you have to repeat, right? So similar with this. And so the kind of the international standard right now is 72 treatments over 21 days, which means 3 soaks a day for 20 minutes, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Originally in the Middle Ages, it was 40 days and 40 nights, like you were in the wilderness. So, but then it gets short during the Enlightenment time. And there was one time it was 28 days, which had to do with the cycles of the moon, but been pretty much since the 19th century, 21 days.
And I would say that there are some cases, very advanced cases, like that paralysis case. There's a lot of actually in the literature of people, mostly miners who had some sort of mercury poisoning that affected their nervous system. They would usually be there for months, three to 6 months. But when you're literally wheeled in on a wheelchair and you can walk out, that's a huge thing. So
Yeah, and in Germany, it used to be 6 weeks for a cure, and that's been lessened to 3 weeks now, mainly because of the cost to the healthcare system, because it's all paid for.
that's right.
But like my cousin, when he broke his leg playing soccer, he went to Balneology for 6 weeks, and they have spa doctors on site.
Wow.
That's right. And the doctors are paid for by the medical insurance systems in those countries. Since we're coming up on the end of the hour, Vicki, since there's going to be some interest here in what we've been talking about, Hot Springs Connection in Hot Springs, Arkansas, can you give us some information on where we can sign up to register for the event and everything?
Oh, well, thank you for that timely plug, Marcus. So it's very simple. hotspringsconnection.com has all the details, how to register, airport information, the preliminary schedule. So yeah, if you haven't looked at it, check it out.
Thank you so much.
Have everybody there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeff Birkby.
Oh, wait, don't forget the sociability aspects.
Yeah.
Like the last presentation from the last time that when you reach out to a stranger, it helps everybody.
Yeah.
And
Right.
hot springs are the only place, or baths are the only place where people can easily meet one another. If you go out to a restaurant, you're at your own table. You're kind of frozen in that, even though you could talk to people next door. But in a bath, it's much easier to, if you want.
Building healthy communities through healthy health practices and social practices. I think it's the way.
Yeah. And we value you all in this BANA community. Let's spread it.
Nice.
So
Well,
next
thank you,
month
Jen.
we're going to we'll feature Chris Devlin. He'll be talking about spiritual bathing. So that'll be our continental call next month. So hope you can join us.
Balneology.org. That's our site. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.